Welcome back to another great episode of The Science of Getting High. I'm Dr. Falco, and this episode is going to be on the science of meditation and how it can lead to altered states that make us feel good. The next two episodes, I'm going to focus on meditation for this one and then prayer for the next one. And personally, I'm agnostic, but the more I learn about how complicated the brain is and how many different types of drugs we've tried to develop to treat depression, anxiety, other psychological disorders, the more I think there might be merit in exercise, meditation, maybe even prayer to try and treat things. Also, there are a lot of people who have crazy experiences praying, meditating that might not be all that different from drug experiences. So what is making that happen? I'd like to try and understand what's going on, look into the research and see if we can get an answer to that. Now, there's a lot more research out there on mindfulness meditation than prayer, and I think that's because you don't have to believe in God to meditate. So there's more scientific evidence to support meditation might be useful for things like depression, chronic pain, other things. That doesn't necessarily mean that meditation is better, just that there's more research on it currently. So this episode, I'm going to go through some of those studies, talk about how meditation can potentially lead to psychological benefits. There are a lot of different types of meditations. When we talk about meditation, it's not just one overarching thing, and there are different results clinically for different types of meditation. So some of the meditation types include open awareness, mindfulness, mantra-based meditation, loving kindness meditation, and I'm not going to talk about all of these in detail. I'm mostly going to focus on mindfulness meditation because that's the most well-studied, and that's the one that is kind of being prescribed to patients to potentially treat different disorders. Now, one of the main definitions of mindfulness meditation is moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness of one's experience cultivated by paying attention, which kind of sounds like word soup when I first looked at it. What that can actually mean is closing your eyes and focusing on the breath, focusing on bodily sensations. So you're kind of maintaining control of your attention and where your focus goes. Another term for this can be meta-awareness, and it's becoming aware of what you're aware of. So you're paying attention to awareness itself. And oftentimes your mind will drift off, and sometimes you kind of let your mind drift off, but then bring it back to focusing on your breath or something else. So you can imagine this practice, it doesn't really have any sort of religious connotation, although the practice is based off of Buddhist tradition, but just paying attention to your breath doesn't really have any dogma or something. I feel like anyone from any religion could potentially do this. Now, part of the non-judgmental part of meditation is to not be critical of yourself, and this avoids self-referential thinking. So if you remember from the psilocybin episode when I talked about the default mode network, there's one theory of depression that says if the default mode network is overactive, you have too much self-referential thinking, rumination over negative thought states, cyclical thought patterns that might be detrimental to the person. That can be bad. So with meditation, by removing that self-referential thinking, it might potentially reduce depression. So that's one theory on how it could work. And Buddhist philosophy kind of underpins some of that. And meditation is thought to aid in disidentification of the self. And it's thought that the idea of a static concept of self can lead to psychological distress. So if you think of the self as less of a static identity, maybe you can, reach enlightenment or something. Sorry if any Buddhists are watching this and I completely butchered that, but I got it off of a paper. I'm just showing the picture right there. And what I thought was interesting is that we actually see with disidentification of the self, we have a lot of crossover with ego dissolution that happens with psychedelic experiences. And there's some evidence that psychedelic experiences can enhance the ability to meditate. So there was one study where they found that people who took psilocybin had deeper meditative states in open awareness meditation. So I wouldn't say psychedelic experiences are the same as meditation. A lot of meditators would say that meditation is much better than psychedelic states and that it can induce changes in the brain that are beneficial, that don't involve taking drugs. So I'd probably, maybe mostly agree with that. But I think it's interesting that we do see a little bit of blending in some areas of psychedelic experiences and meditation. And these crossovers could be one way that we could explain how meditation can get us high, and maybe crazy things like astral projection when people feel like they're floating in space or something while meditating. That could be kind of an explanation for how that happens. In addition to this default mode network activity, there's also some differences in how the thalamus relays information. So psilocybin also reduced thalamic filtering, so it basically allowed more raw sensory information to be perceived. And we also see changes in how the thalamus relays information to the cortex, where we process information. So meditation might also modify this part of the brain and could also lead to some of these wild experiences. If we look at some of the evidence to show how meditation might potentially be useful to treat different conditions, there's a meta-analysis in the Journal of the American Medical Association. This is a really high-profile, high-quality journal, so I would trust these results personally as a scientist. And they found that mindfulness meditation improved anxiety, depression, stress, and pain. And something that I found interesting here is they compared mindfulness meditation and mantra meditation, and they found in all of the cases, mindfulness meditation did better. So the type of meditation does seem to matter, which I think is interesting. And mantra meditation is where you typically repeat a phrase over and over again, rather than mindfulness meditation where you're kind of focusing on the breath or parts of your body, or paying attention to specific sensations rather than repeating a phrase. So differences in meditative states seem to potentially correlate to differences in clinical outcomes. The improvement of the effect was found to be moderate in a lot of these conditions. So we had a moderate improvement in anxiety, depression, and pain. With pain, we see a range of improvement from 5% to 31%. And with depression, we see a range of negative 5% to 55%. So pretty big ranges here between not very helpful to a pretty big clinical benefit. And I think another thing to consider here is that different patients there might be some people that meditation will work for and some people that it will not work for. I actually tried a couple types of meditation right before filming this video, and I personally found it pretty hard to do. These studies generally have to practice meditation for 8 weeks, so it's not something that you can do right away, but I would say the evidence looks like it suggests that there's definitely something here to the science of meditation being useful for these disorders. And another thing that I'll say is that for a lot of these conditions, meditation wasn't better than taking prescription drugs. So it's not like this is a complete fix to all of these problems. It's more like another tool in the toolbox. So if someone doesn't want to take medication, then potentially meditation could be an option. One of the benefits with meditation over medication is that it pretty much doesn't have any adverse events. So the vast majority of these studies found that there was no harm to doing meditation, which I think makes sense. How could focusing on your breath potentially, cause an illness? All right, so the show is the science of getting high. So what about the highs of meditation? How do those happen? Just as an example for what someone could experience, I'm going to read a quote from someone in an altered spiritual state. So this person said, "I, as an unnameable but individual being, was traveling down an infinite roller coaster like waves of pure white, ecstatic light. The ecstasy was overwhelming and rose and fell in intensity with the waves of light. The light path seemed infinitely long in both directions. The sense of being and the light was infinitely more real than anything I had ever experienced." So that sounded pretty fun. It sounds like a drug experience. So what was going on in that guy's brain to let him experience that? This will probably come as no surprise, but there isn't hard scientific evidence on this. So the short answer is we don't know, but I'll give some potential theories as to how this could happen. So one theory that some researchers into psychedelic drugs have put forward, and I think this could make some sense, is our brain kind of has this process for a pivotal mental state. It can sort of help rewire your brain during periods of crisis or extreme stress, and you might have certain types of spiritual out-of-body experiences, and this might just have been some sort of mechanism that humans evolved with over time to try and help us deal with certain things. Another possibility is maybe it is a brief psychotic episode. So psychotic episodes are not that uncommon. Between 1% to 3% of people can experience psychotic episodes. And if you are meditating or praying, it's possible that you would attribute a psychotic episode to a religious experience rather than just some delusion to yourself. So that's one possibility. There are some people who have suggested that the brain makes DMT, a psychedelic drug, and DMT could cause these effects, but I think this is incredibly unlikely. The pineal gland, the part of the brain that produces DMT, is basically too small to produce enough DMT that would be even mildly psychoactive. So I don't put any weight behind that. There's a pretty good paper that talks about this exactly. And at the end of this paper, he proposed some mechanisms for what a near-death experience might be like. I think a near-death experience is probably going to be different than a meditative experience, but it's also some type of altered state that leads you to some altered level of consciousness. So this guy, David Nichols, suggested that it could be due to huge increases in noradrenaline during asphyxia. Also, we get big increases in dynorphin, which is an opioid in the brain that might cause effects similar to psychedelic experiences. Serotonin can also be increased in the brain in addition to dopamine and glutamate. Now, some types of meditation also involve breath work. So some of you might have heard of the Wim Hof method. This is the Iceman who jumps into freezing cold water. So he has breathing techniques that involve certain types of hyperventilation. And I've tried this, and you do get a high from this. So modifying your breath, kind of approaching certain states where you're modifying how much oxygen your brain has, might also lead you to have some type of altered state. So that's what I got for you. Some science, some speculation in this episode. Next time I will talk about prayer, and hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you have any questions and you want to know more, post a question in the comments. I'll go into more detail. If you have questions about any of the studies, ask me a question. I'll respond. Happy to do more research and explain stuff that might be too boring to talk about on a short video. So see you later.